Whistling Death, or Death to its pilots. It looked like a beast. It flew like a bullet. It terrified enemy pilots. But behind the fearsome nickname Whistling Death was a brutal irony. The F4U Corsair was far more dangerous to the men flying it than the enemy they were hunting. The F4U Corsair wasn't just a new fighter. It was a revolution in wartime aviation. With its long nose, bent wings, and brutal engine roar, it was an unmistakable shape in the skies over the Pacific. But for all its terrifying presence, it had a problem. It was killing the very pilots it was built to protect. And not in combat. On landing. Before it became a legend, the Corsair very nearly became a failure. And to understand why, we have to go back to 1938, when the U.S. Navy issued a seemingly simple request. Build a carrier base fighter that could fly faster, hit harder, and outmatch anything in the world. Too much machine for the mission. They built it to win a war, but what they created was so powerful, it pushed beyond what pilots and carriers could handle. Vought engineers centered the design around a monster, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, a 2,000 horsepower radial engine. To tame it, they needed a 13-foot propeller, so large it would strike the ground with traditional landing gear. The solution? A unique inverted gull-wing design. It allowed shorter, stronger gear that cleared the massive prop while folding up for carrier storage. It worked and looked intimidating. The prototype flew in May 1940, and it instantly turned heads. The Corsair became the first American fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour in level flight, faster than anything in U.S. service at the time. But there was a catch. Carrier landings are brutal even today. Short decks, moving targets, tiny margins for error. The Corsair's design, unfortunately, made landings nightmarish. Its long nose and rear-set cockpit gave pilots almost no forward visibility during approach. They had to rely entirely on hand signals from landing officers. But visibility was only part of the problem. The Corsair's stall characteristics were unpredictable and deadly. As speed dropped, one wing would lose lift first, causing the aircraft to violently roll at low altitude. This meant instant disaster. Worse still, the landing gear was too stiff. Upon touchdown, the Corsair had a nasty habit of bouncing back into the air, a phenomenon called porpoising that often led to crashes, bent props, and worse, collisions with other parked aircraft on deck. By late 1942, the Navy had had enough. The Corsair was officially rejected for carrier duty. It was reassigned to the U.S. Marine Corps for land-based operations, a major blow for what was supposed to be the Navy's ultimate fighter. How the British and Marines saved the Corsair. While the U.S. Navy gave up on the Corsair, the Royal Navy and the Marine Corps doubled down and found creative ways to turn a dangerous plane into a deadly asset. Where the U.S. Navy saw a liability, the British Royal Navy saw a necessity. They didn't have the luxury of grounding any aircraft. British carrier crews got creative. Instead of straight-line landings, they adopted a curved approach, letting pilots keep the deck in view around the Corsair's nose. It worked. They also clipped the wingtips to fit the Corsair in smaller hangars and modified procedures for safer deck handling. Soon, British carriers were operating Corsairs at sea with success. Meanwhile, the U.S. Marines operating from island airstrips didn't face the same carrier challenges. Engineers made a critical fix, adding a stall strip to the right wing. This small modification forced both wings to stall together, preventing the lethal roll. With these changes, the Corsair was about to get a second chance in the brutal skies of the South Pacific. A bloody debut, Valentine's Day Massacre. It was supposed to be the Corsair's combat debut. Instead, it became a disaster remembered in blood. On February 14, 1943, 12 Marine Corsairs launched from Guadalcanal to escort B-24 bombers. They were joined by P-38 Lightnings, but they had no idea that over 40 Japanese fighters were lying in wait. The result was catastrophic. 8 American aircraft were lost, 2 Corsairs destroyed, and only 1 confirmed enemy kill, achieved in a mid-air collision. The event would go down in history as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. It was a harsh introduction, but it wasn't the end. The Corsairs' real fight and redemption was just beginning. Turning the tide. The Corsair had the firepower, the speed, the resilience. It just needed the chance to prove it. In raw performance, the Corsair had few rivals. Against the famed Mitsubishi Zero, it had 3 massive advantages. 1. Speed, over 80 miles per hour faster in a straight line. 2. Dive capability. The Corsair could survive vertical dives the Zero couldn't. 3. Firepower, 650 calories machine guns, later upgraded to 4 20mm cannons with rockets and bombs. But the Corsair still had flaws. Visibility was still poor in dogfights. Maintenance was difficult. Tropical conditions wore the aircraft down. Mechanics worked miracles just to keep them flying. Yet Corsair squadrons began racking up kills across the Pacific. The Japanese were paying attention. They gave the Corsair its most legendary name, Whistling Death, thanks to the eerie shriek it made in a dive, caused by airflow over its winged ducts. Reborn on the carrier deck. The Navy had once rejected it. Now they couldn't ignore it. By early 1944, the Pacific War had intensified. The U.S. Navy needed every edge it could get. With the Corsair proving itself in Marine hands, Navy engineers went back to work. They reinforced landing gear, reduced bounce on landing, raised the pilot seat, and installed a bulge canopy to improve visibility. Finally, after 2 years in exile, the Corsair was approved for carrier use. From there, it surged into frontline service, fighting over Okinawa, the Philippines, and even the Japanese home islands. Its kill-to-loss ratio, an incredible 11-to-1. The Corsair had evolved from pilot killer to legend. A jet-age dinosaur still scoring kills. By Korea, jets ruled the sky. But the Corsair had one last surprise to offer. When the Korean War began in 1950, prop-driven fighters were already obsolete. Or so people thought. The Corsair couldn't outfight Soviet MiG-15 jets, but it wasn't trying to. It flew low, hit hard, and supported troops on the ground where jets were too fast or too high to be effective. Corsairs were even modified for night missions, flying dangerous black hat, raids, and rough terrain. And somehow, impossibly, the Corsair still had one last dogfight left. On September 10, 1952, Marine Captain Jesse G. Falmer was flying a Corsair on a ground support mission when he was ambushed by MiG-15s. In the chaos, one MiG got too close in a low-speed turn. Captain Falmer opened up with his 4 cannons and shot the MiG out of the sky. He was shot down moments later and rescued. But the kill stood. A World War II-era Corsair had just downed a jet fighter. Corsair versus Mustang. In 1969, if you thought the Corsair story ended in Korea, think again. In 1969, long after both planes were supposed to be museum pieces, a short war broke out between El Salvador and Honduras, the now infamous Massacre War. El Salvador scrambled American-made P-51 Mustangs. Honduras launched a few aging Corsairs. In a surreal echo of World War II, these legendary fighters met in combat one last time. Captain Fernando Soto Enriquez, flying Corsair, managed to shoot down 2 Mustangs and later that day even down to jet-powered A-37 Dragonfly. These would go down as some of the last recorded aerial kills ever made by World War II-era piston fighters. The legend that refused to die. The Corsair was a contradiction, a death trap, a savior, a relic, a warrior, and in the end, it became one of the most enduring aircraft stories of the 20th century. The F4U Corsair began as a nightmare to fly, too fast, too wild, and too deadly for the very pilots it was supposed to protect. But over time it evolved, adapted, dominated, and outlasted nearly every other aircraft of its generation. It was grounded, rejected, redeemed, and eventually feared. And when the propeller age finally ended, the Corsair didn't just fade away, it went out fighting. For more such videos, check out our channel and its playlist. Thanks for watching.